Welcome to Whispers of Crime, where real crimes exist and secrets have never been revealed. Join us as we explore horrific cases and ruthless criminals. Right now, let's dive into the story of the Golden State Killer, a murderer who eluded capture for decades. Follow the tense battle between truth and deception, where clues are unveiled and the figure behind the heinous crimes is brought to light. The truth is slowly being revealed. Summer 1990 in California, the night air was still, holding its breath. A gentle breeze whispered through the trees lining the streets, carrying the distinct scent of wild grass from the suburbs. The streetlights cast a dim yellow glow, barely illuminating a narrow alleyway. Darkness seemed to swallow everything except for a figure gliding swiftly and silently. The man knew exactly where he was going, as if he had memorized every nook and cranny of this place. In the 70s and 80s, a string of murders and rapes had terrorized the state of California, leaving a wake of panic and horror. But since then, the evil one, known as the Golden State Killer, had vanished. No traces, no leads, until tonight. Detective Marcus Wright, who had spent much of his career chasing dead-end cases, was at home with a glass of red wine. His hand brushed against a box containing dusty old files, unsolved cases that had haunted him for years. Another sleepless night, but to Marcus, it hardly mattered. His work had become a part of him, like a chronic illness with no cure. The phone rang, shattering the stillness. It was an old colleague, someone who only called when something serious was at hand. "Marcus, there's something. I think you should get to the scene right away." Marcus sighed, fatigue settling in, but his instincts urged him to rise. He pressed the gas, speeding through the empty night streets. Little did he know that this night would mark the beginning of a series of events that would change everything. When Marcus arrived at the scene, the sight before him made him freeze. Police had cordoned off a small neighborhood, but what caught his attention most was a strange feeling of an unseen presence. There was something familiar. The old cases rushed back to his mind, each image, each victim, all intertwined, creating a dark tapestry. The next day, the sun was high, but the heaviness of the investigation lingered. Marcus returned to the office, and this time he decided to revisit the old case files. The years of the Golden State Killer's reign had always haunted him. There had been a time when Marcus believed they had lost his trail for good. As he reread the forensic reports, something peculiar struck him. A small detail, seemingly inconsequential, appeared in both the old and new cases. "No way," he murmured. Instinct told Marcus that the Golden State Killer had returned. But this killer was not like any other criminal Marcus had faced. He was not just an ordinary serial killer. He was a master manipulator, knowing how to hide among the crowd, like a shadow that could never be grasped. Marcus realized he was not just racing against time, but also against a mind so intelligent it bordered on madness. While searching for clues, Marcus received an unexpected call from an anonymous woman. She claimed to have seen a suspicious man in her neighborhood the night before. "I know this sounds crazy, but his eyes, they didn't look normal." Marcus immediately sensed the significance of this testimony. He decided to meet the woman that afternoon. Her face was gaunt, her voice trembling. He had a gaze, chillingly cold. "I saw it in my dreams." The woman could not elaborate further, but Marcus knew this sense of dread was not unfounded. Clues began to emerge, but time was not on Marcus's side. The monster was still out there, and every mistake could lead to another death. The next morning, Marcus woke up with heavy eyes, as if the darkness of past cases had haunted his mind. He struggled to sip his coffee, unable to forget the woman's words from the night before. Cold, lifeless eyes. It reminded him of reports from old murder cases, witnesses who had mentioned a gaze just like that. The ghost of the Golden State Killer had returned. He sat down in front of the computer, scrolling through files in the database. This killer had a peculiar habit. He not only murdered but also returned to the crime scenes months later, leaving behind small traces that the police never discovered. This odd behavior seemed almost like a challenge to the investigators. Marcus felt that if they didn't act quickly, there was a high probability of another victim falling prey. Suddenly, there was a knock on the office door. It was Sarah, a passionate young investigator who was always haunted by unsolved cases. "I found something, Marcus." She placed a thick stack of files in front of him. "I think the killer might have left a clue in places the police never thought to look." Marcus raised an eyebrow, focusing more intently. Sarah continued, "A photo taken 15 years ago from a crime scene in Visalia. Look, there's something strange about the way the objects are arranged." Marcus stared at the picture. Indeed, everything seemed to be arranged deliberately. If he left small clues like this at each scene, then perhaps... Marcus paused, realizing the lead they had overlooked all these years. He was playing a game of cat and mouse, challenging them to find him. And maybe he had never truly vanished. Immediately, Marcus and Sarah made a plan to revisit all the old crime scenes. They began by going through the areas where the Golden State Killer had once operated. Time had faded his traces, but shadows still lurked in every alley, every corner of the houses. "We may be getting closer than ever," Marcus thought to himself, but he knew that the deeper they delved into the killer's game, the greater the risk of falling into his trap. After days of relentless searching, Marcus and Sarah found themselves at an abandoned house on the outskirts of Sacramento. This had once been the scene of a horrifying attack more than 2 decades ago. The area was now forgotten, like a place time had deliberately left behind. A chill filled every nook and cranny. The haunting memories of the past seemed to echo in every cracked brick and peeling wall. Sarah climbed the stairs, her eyes examining every detail. She had begun to understand how the Golden State Killer operated. "If we're right, then he may have left something here," Sarah said, her voice filled with determination. Marcus followed behind, his mind starting to form a theory. "He always had a way of playing with us, as if he wanted to test if we were smart enough to catch him." He recalled previous cases, the way the killer would return to the scene just to alter clues that the police had never noticed. "But this time, we won't let him escape," Marcus vowed. They entered the final room of the house. Sarah quickly opened her bag, pulling out a UV light to check for potential hidden traces. "Do you see anything?" she asked, shining the light on the wall. Then, amidst the yellow stains, Marcus spotted a faint but intact handprint. "Here it is," he whispered, his heart racing. A clear trace, yet positioned where the police had never before paid attention. The killer had left a clue, perhaps a sign of his arrogance. The game had begun, but this time Marcus and Sarah were ready to respond. The monster might hide in the shadows, but every step he took left a trace. It just took someone patient enough to find it. And now, they had uncovered the first clue. In a small room at the Sacramento police station, Marcus and Sarah sat across from each other, piecing together the fragments of the case. The fingerprint discovered in the abandoned house was an important clue, but it was just a small step in unveiling the mystery of the murderer who had evaded capture for decades. Sarah leaned over, intently reading through the reports. "We know he returned to the scenes after committing the crimes. But why at certain times?" Marcus remained silent. Sarah's question made him think, but he couldn't come up with an accurate answer. Clearly he was very confident, unafraid to return, and each time left behind tiny traces like a game. The investigation seemed endless, but Marcus knew that just one more clue could change everything. He stood up, left the office and stepped outside, where night was gradually falling. The air was quiet, but in Marcus's mind the tension felt like a tightening coil. He knew he was being watched, somewhere in the dark, aware of every step they took. The feeling of being surveilled haunted Marcus like an unrelenting ghost. Suddenly, a call came in. A woman's voice was frantic and scared. "I just received a message from a strange number. He knows I'm following this case. I'm terrified." Marcus tried to keep calm, but he knew this was no joke. The Golden State Killer was targeting those connected to the investigation. "Stay where you are. We'll be there right away," Marcus said, his voice dry. When he and Sarah arrived at the woman's home, everything seemed quiet, but the tension was palpable in every breath. The front door was slightly ajar. Marcus and Sarah exchanged glances and then slowly entered. Inside the house, everything was still, with no signs of disturbance. But as they ascended the stairs, they noticed the bedroom door was closed. An unsettling feeling crept into Marcus. He pushed the door open. Before them was a haunting sight. The woman lay motionless on the bed, eyes wide open, mouth slightly twisted as if trying to say something. Sarah gasped, while Marcus stepped closer to check. She was dead. The killer had reached them first, proving once again that he was always one step ahead. Marcus clenched his fists, filled with anger and despair. He was not just a murderer. He was a manipulative mastermind playing a game of cat and mouse with them. The closer they got, the further he retreated. But Marcus couldn't give up. This was not just justice for the victims, it was a battle against the darkness within himself. After that heartbreaking event, Marcus and Sarah delved deeper into the investigation. They knew that any mistake could lead to another death. The killer was no longer just a lurking shadow. He had become a true predator, and they were the next prey. Marcus couldn't shake the image of the deceased woman's eyes, a warning that they needed to be more cautious. They returned to the office, beginning to reanalyze everything they had gathered. A hair sample found at an old crime scene, a blurry surveillance video, every tiny detail was scrutinized meticulously. Suddenly, Sarah made a realization. He might have left traces in the old DNA files, she said, her eyes lighting up. We didn't examine these records thoroughly because the technology wasn't advanced back then. But now it's different. Marcus nodded. He knew that if they could compare the DNA sample with modern data, their chances of identifying the killer would increase significantly. They sent the DNA sample to the forensic lab, and the waiting period for results turned into a psychological struggle. Each minute felt like hours, and Marcus felt the tension tightening around him. He paced the room while Sarah sat in front of the computer, reviewing old cases. When the results from the lab came in, Marcus's heart stopped for a moment. "We have the results," Sarah said, her voice trembling. A DNA sample matched a suspect in a case from a neighboring state. But more importantly, his name was now revealed. Joseph D'Angelo. A chill ran down Marcus's spine. D'Angelo, he was a former police officer. The final pieces fell into place. The murderer had once been a law enforcement officer, explaining why he had always been a step ahead. He knew how to conceal himself, how to evade capture, and most importantly, he knew how to manipulate the system to protect himself. The hunt had officially entered a new phase. Marcus and Sarah now knew who their enemy was, but capturing him would not be easy. He had evaded justice for so many years, and now, as the darkness began to unravel, the real game was just beginning. The next morning, Marcus and Sarah meticulously planned the operation to apprehend Joseph D'Angelo. His house lay on the outskirts of Sacramento, a place where, for decades, he had hidden in the shadows of his past. They had to act swiftly before D'Angelo realized he had been discovered. "We can't let him slip away this time," Marcus declared, his eyes filled with determination. He had lived like a ghost among innocent neighbors, but now, everything would change. They were not only facing a serial killer, they were confronting a man who had once been part of the very system they were sworn to protect. The investigation team was mobilized, and every detail was carefully arranged. Marcus led the group, alongside Sarah and several other officers, navigating the narrow streets. Every step was calculated. No one was allowed to show signs that might cause D'Angelo to flee. As they approached D'Angelo's house, Marcus felt a wave of apprehension wash over him. He had lurked in darkness for so many years, and now just one more step could illuminate everything. "Stay in contact," Marcus ordered the team. "We need to control every exit." They split into smaller units, each assigned a specific area of the neighborhood. Sarah was tasked with monitoring the back of the house, where a possible escape route for D'Angelo might exist. Marcus positioned himself at the front, feeling as if time had slowed to a crawl. Memories of the victims and the relentless investigations swirled in his mind. As they began to breach the house, Marcus felt his breath grow heavy. His senses were sharper than ever. D'Angelo could be lurking just nearby, in the very space they had come to reclaim. They fanned out, searching room by room. Suddenly, a noise emanated from the back bedroom. Marcus signaled to his team. Everyone tensed and prepared. They stealthily approached the door, and Marcus gently pushed it open. Before them lay a surreal scene. D'Angelo sat in a chair, his expression a mixture of shock and panic. "Don't move," Marcus shouted, gun firmly in hand. D'Angelo stood up, his previously calm demeanor shattered. "You can't do anything to me," he yelled, his eyes flashing with madness. They had confronted him, and now the battle of wits between Marcus and Joseph D'Angelo was officially underway. "Tell us what happened, and maybe we'll consider your fate," Marcus said, trying to maintain his composure. But D'Angelo was too accustomed to this game, and the coldness in his gaze was unmistakable. A psychological war was in progress. He had evaded capture for too long, and now, faced with the truth, he couldn't accept it. Marcus understood that D'Angelo was not just a killer, he was a manipulator, willing to employ any trick to escape his guilt. "Don't let those names frighten you," Marcus urged, trying to connect with him. "Think about the victims. They deserve justice." D'Angelo's mouth twisted into a sardonic smile, which only fueled Marcus's anger. "You think you can pin this on me? I've never been caught. I won't let that happen." His voice was sharp and defiant. Marcus recognized that he wasn't just dealing with a criminal, he was up against a self-satisfied monster in society. Determined, Marcus aimed to drag him into the light, not just for the victims, but for all that D'Angelo had stolen away. This struggle would not only be physical, it would be a battle of minds. They had found him, but would they have enough strength to pull him from the darkness? The confrontation with Joseph D'Angelo had reached a boiling point. Marcus felt an immense pressure, not only from the presence of the killer, but also from the memories of the past that he stirred within Marcus's mind. D'Angelo had pushed Marcus's fears to their limits, and they both understood that this was not just a battle of two adversaries, but a conflict between right and wrong. D'Angelo was no longer able to maintain his calm facade. He stood in the middle of the room, panic flashing in his eyes. "I'm not who you think I am," he screamed, the voice of a man losing control. "I'm just a normal guy." "Normal people don't kill," Marcus retorted. "Normal people don't leave haunting memories for victims and their families." He stepped closer, determined not to give D'Angelo an opportunity to escape. "Just give me a chance," D'Angelo pleaded, as if begging for mercy. "I'm no longer that person from the past." The remorse he displayed could merely be part of his strategy, yet Marcus felt a part of his own soul stir. "Lying won't save you," Marcus replied, emotions surging within him. "All the pain, all the memories, all of it is because of you. It's time for you to face what you've done." D'Angelo couldn't remain still. He felt the weight of his accumulated guilt crashing down on him. "They're not the only ones suffering," he bellowed, his eyes wild. "I've lived in fear too. I've been hurt." Marcus sensed the madness creeping into D'Angelo's voice. This wasn't remorse. It was an attempt to justify his actions. "Your suffering cannot compare to what the victims endured," Marcus countered, struggling to maintain his composure. They had no chance to rationalize their actions. Silence enveloped the room, but within Marcus, rage bubbled to the surface. D'Angelo had done this time and again, and now Marcus could not allow him to continue evading responsibility. He was no longer a mere shadow lurking in the darkness. He had become a monster society was forced to confront. Meanwhile, Sarah stood at the door, observing the standoff between Marcus and D'Angelo. She felt the tension mounting, sensing that everything was on the verge of collapse. She knew D'Angelo was a dangerous man, and any misstep could lead to disaster. "Marcus," she called out, her voice filled with concern. "We need to be cautious. He has nothing left to lose." Marcus acknowledged her truth. He could become reckless and more vicious when cornered. "We have to control the situation," he said to Sarah. "Stay in contact with the team outside. If anything goes wrong, we need backup immediately." Yet, despite the looming threat, D'Angelo sneered. "You have no idea how well I've prepared for this." He looked toward the window, as if he had anticipated every move. Marcus realized that this struggle was not merely about finding justice. It was also a conflict between those who had been wounded and the one who had inflicted the pain. The standoff between Marcus and D'Angelo reached its peak intensity. D'Angelo began to showcase his arrogance, as if he held all the winning cards. "You think you can expose me? There's no evidence tying me to any crime," he sneered, a self-satisfied glimmer in his eyes. Marcus felt sweat trickling down his forehead. D'Angelo was trying to make them feel weak, but they couldn't back down. They had faced too much pain, and Marcus knew D'Angelo was exploiting their vulnerabilities. "We have enough evidence to bring you to justice," Marcus asserted, though his voice wavered slightly. "We've been tracking you for months. You can't keep running." Sarah sensed the tension in the air. She knew D'Angelo was not just a murderer, but a cunning manipulator who had evaded capture for decades. "We know everything you've done," she said, trying to instill unease in him. "We won't let you escape punishment." D'Angelo looked at them, his eyes lighting up as if he felt his power growing. "You think you can comprehend what I've been through? I'm not the only one who suffers." His voice began to escalate. "I'm not a criminal. I'm a victim." Marcus sighed, a wave of disgust swelling inside him. D'Angelo was attempting to steer the narrative, but they wouldn't let that happen. "The suffering you feel pales in comparison to the pain your victims endured," Marcus stated firmly. "They never had the chance to justify their lives." "You're all so naive," D'Angelo mocked, unable to hide the madness in his tone. "What I did was about survival. I've lived in shadows you could never fathom." Marcus stepped closer, feeling his anger surge. "You can hide behind lies, but the truth will come to light," he replied, aware that he couldn't allow D'Angelo any more time to turn the tables. Sarah looked at Marcus, worry flooding her heart. She knew both Marcus and the team were teetering on the edge. "Marcus," she whispered, "we need to stay calm. Let us handle this." But Marcus was unyielding. "Face it, D'Angelo. It's time to pay for what you've done." He felt a steely resolve taking hold, as if all his years of investigation were leading him to this moment. D'Angelo looked at Marcus, no longer exuding confidence. Fear flickered in his eyes. "No, I won't let that happen," he yelled, rushing toward the window, appearing desperate to escape. Marcus reacted instantly, swiftly blocking his path. "Don't even think about it," he shouted, and the next moment, gunfire erupted as the police stormed the house. The confrontation was swift, and D'Angelo was subdued right before Marcus and Sarah's eyes. Finally, after years of evasion, he had been captured. Marcus felt a wave of emotions wash over him, but deep down, he knew this battle was far from over. After D'Angelo's arrest, everything seemed to settle into a semblance of peace. Yet within Marcus, the haunting memories of the victims and their trauma lingered. He understood that capturing a murderer was not merely a victory. It was the beginning of a journey toward justice. In the weeks that followed, the investigation continued. Evidence and clues from decades past came to light. The suffering of the victims was revisited, and Marcus felt a swell of guilt rise within him. He couldn't shake the faces he had seen in photographs, those who no longer had a chance to live. The trial unfolded under the watchful eyes of the public. Everyone wanted to know about the crimes D'Angelo had committed, but Marcus realized this was not just about revenge. It was also about bringing the victims into the light. They deserved to have their stories told and to know what had happened to them. "This isn't about you," Marcus told D'Angelo during the trial. "This is about your victims. They are the ones society has forgotten." D'Angelo glared at Marcus, defiance etched on his face. "I don't need to say anything. You can't comprehend what I went through." He continued to exude arrogance, but Marcus knew he had lost much of his power. Meanwhile, Sarah stood beside Marcus, witnessing the transformation in his mindset. "Marcus, remember you did the right thing," she said gently. "Don't let these memories weigh you down." Marcus nodded, feeling Sarah's support. This fight was not only about fairness, but also about healing. They needed to keep working to ensure that no one could repeat these crimes in the future. When the trial concluded, D'Angelo was sentenced and faced severe punishment. Marcus felt as though a heavy burden had been lifted, but within him, the memories remained indelible. He had been brought to light, but perhaps he could never truly find peace. "We did this for them," Sarah told Marcus as they left the courthouse. "They will not be forgotten." Marcus gazed out, feeling the sun shine down. Though the past continued to haunt him, he knew everything had changed. They had stood up against the darkness, and while the road ahead was still long, they had illuminated the truth. The journey for justice would continue, and Marcus would not stop fighting to protect those he loved.